Shalom, everybody. How are you? I'm so glad you're able to join me today. Here it is, July the 22nd, 2020, for our weekly 5 Derech lessons in the Torah portion, which this week is Devarim. So thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it, whether you're here in Israel or in the States or anywhere in between. Hope you're not swimming in the ocean. If you are and you can get this, that's pretty good. Just a few words about this Torah portion of Devarim, and that is, this is now the beginning of the last of the 5 books of Moses, is the book of Devarim, and the first portion in it is also called Devarim. The contents of the book of Devarim represent the speeches, the orations that were given by Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. His last 37 days of life are recorded here in the book of Devarim, and these are his messages to the people. He renews and reviews a lot of what was taught so far in the Torah, but now there's a nation that's ready to go into the land of Israel, and so they need to relearn some of the messages. They need to buff and polish a lot of what they already have heard or heard through their ancestors, their parents, grandparents. In the book of Devarim, there are 200 laws. That's out of 613, so that means roughly a third of all the laws in the Torah are in this last book called Devarim. And of these 200 laws or so, 70 are brand new. So they're not all a review. Some of them, 70, are brand new, and that's interesting to note. Today, well, it depends where you are. If you're in Israel, today is now, because it's evening, it's already the second day of Av. Other places, it's more likely the first day of Av, which means it's still Rosh Chodesh Av. And being that, we have exactly 2 months to go to Rosh Hashanah. The first day of Av, then we have the first day of Elul, then we have the first day of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah. So today we are roughly around 2 months away from Rosh Hashanah. And that gives us a lot of opportunity between now and then to do all kinds of introspection and all kinds of tshuva and repentance and thinking about our lives and prioritizing our lives as well. This portion of Devarim is always read before Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is next Wednesday night and Thursday. This coming Shabbat is called Shabbat Chazon. It is a prophecy that we read in the Haftarah, the additional prophetic reading, not pathetic reading, prophetic reading. It's a piece of prophecy from the prophet Jeremiah, and he prophesies the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, the temples, etc. Today also we mark exactly 3 months into these lessons of 5 Derech lessons in the Parsha. We started April 22, when I was getting kind of lonely from the corona. April 22, and here it is July 22, so it's 3 months. If I had one of those birthday, one of kind of those things, I would blow on it. If I had confetti, I would do it. But the greatest gift that I get is all the people watching here and the Pirkei Avot on Monday night. So thank you again very much for joining, and I really appreciate it. And now let's jump into the 5 Derech lessons in the Parsha of Devarim. Okay, here's Derech lesson number 1. By the way, I'm unusually excited about these 5 Derech lessons. I'm always happy to present every Wednesday night. There's something about some of these that really touch me, and I don't know if I'll let you know which ones, but I'm very excited. Derech lesson number 1, chapter 1, verse 1, right from the very beginning of the book of Devarim, last book of the Torah, chapter 1, verse 1. Here it says, Eila hadvarim, these are the things, Asher diber Moshe, that Moses spoke to the people, El Kol Yisrael, to all the people of Israel, Be'ever hayarden, Bamidbar, Ba'arava, Mulsuf, Ben Paran uvein Tofel, Velavan v'chatzerot v'di zahav. Wow, that's a pretty long verse, isn't it? These are the things that Moses spoke to the children of Israel while being on the other side of the Jordan, concerning the wilderness, concerning the Arava, opposite the Sea of Reeds, between Paran and Tofel, and Lavan and Chatzerot and Di Zahav. So if you have Waze, Why don't you put all of that into ways and see exactly where he was? Well, he was on the other side of the Jordan River. He was in what we call today Jordan. So it's interesting because there are a lot of names being mentioned here. And what our commentaries say, especially Rashi, the great commentator from France almost 1,000 years ago, they say that each location that he mentions, about 7, 8, 9 locations here, each location alludes to a different sin that was done by the people while they were journeying in the desert. For example, the word Bamidbar. So they were in the desert. But Bamidbar also connotes a memory of the complaints of the people that led to when they felt that they were starving, and all the complaints against God. Why isn't he feeding us? Moses, you brought us out here from Egypt, the great country where we had so much freedom, not. And you brought us here to starve? So the word Bamidbar is like a symbol of that kind of a sin when they complained. The word Ba'arava literally means a wilderness. Arava. So what does that mean? The plain, Plain, where they were seduced by the Midianite women, is kind of suggested by that word Arava. And so we would find with all of these places that were named in chapter 1, verse 1, it also alludes to the spies, the sin of the spies, their complaints about having to eat that god-awful manna bread. They didn't like it after a while. It was, too plain. They didn't care for it. Miriam's gossip about Moshe's wife, another place connotes that, the golden calf. So basically, Moses is trying to tell this current generation, before you go into the land of Israel, here are the kinds of things that really ticked God off. So don't do them again. Don't do these things again when you go into the Holy Land. You do them here in the desert, okay, it's not good either. But when you go into the Holy Land, you don't want to pollute the holiness of the land of Israel with these types of sins. So he's telling them all about the sins that they did, except he doesn't tell them openly. He tells them in a very veiled way by mentioning names where those kinds of things happen. So the question that many of the commentators ask is, why not mention the sins? Why are you mentioning places that allude to the sins? Mentioning the sins right away would be very more direct. I think you would agree with me, right? Here's what you did, and don't do it anymore. So here's what Rashi says. Rashi, the great commentator from France. He says, why is it only places that are named and not the sins? This is a beautiful lesson. Rashi says in Hebrew, and of course I'll translate, Mipnei kevodan shel Yisrael. Why does he only mention the names of the places where those sins were done and not the sins themselves? Due to the honor of the people of Israel, the honor that they were due as the holy nation of God. They were due a certain kind of respect. And Moshe wanted to save them from embarrassment. Even though they sinned, he wanted to hold back on mentioning the sin in order that they not be too embarrassed by, oh yeah, oh my God, oh, right, oh, we did that too, oh. He didn't want to pour it on, in a sense, and so he just mentioned the names, and from the names they got exactly what those sins were. And by the way, this is a great lesson for these days leading up to Tisha B'Av. It's really a good lesson all the time. Very often we might feel a need to criticize somebody, might feel a need to, I don't want to say tell them off, but express very strongly how much they hurt us, insulted us, etc. And we really want to let them have it. And so I think this Derech Eretz lesson is telling us that if we have something to say to somebody that's not necessarily complimentary, is that a good way to put it? There's no need to devastate them when we criticize them. There's no need when we rebuke or correct somebody, admonish someone, whatever word you want to use. There is no need to dress them down and to crush them, because that's what Moses would have done if he mentioned the sins. They would have been crushed, embarrassed, not knowing where to go from there spiritually. How do you get out of that? And so he saved them that embarrassment, and I think it's a good lesson for all of us. If we want to say something to somebody that reminds them of something they did or said to us, say it in perhaps the most gentle way, and there's no need for us to crush them, and there's no need for us to dress them down and to make them feel like a zero or a nobody. I think it's a very important lesson. And by the way, I just wanted to mention, those of you who are making comments, I really appreciate it. If you have any questions about anything I say, please feel free to ask, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. So that was Derech Eretz lesson number 1. Hope you liked it. Here's Derech Eretz lesson number 2. It says that in chapter 1, verse 5, it says, Be'ever Ayardain, across the Jordan, Be'eretz Moav, in the land of Moav, Ho'il Moshe be'er et haTorah hazot lemor. On the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses began explaining the Torah. How long will he do this? 37 days, right? That's what I mentioned in the beginning. 37 days. You think your rabbi talks for a long time? 37 days. I'm going to imagine he broke it up, different parts, different days. I don't think it was 37 days straight. Anyway, so this is what the verse says. He began to explain the Torah at this particular time. We know it is the first of the Hebrew month of Shvat, because 37 days later is the 7th of Adar, which we know is the Yortzeit of Moses. So he started this on the first day of Shvat, and it says that he started to explain the Torah. Explaining the Torah. So Rashi, again, the great commentator, takes from the words Be'er et haTorah hazot. He began explaining this Torah. Rashi says, what do you mean by he began explaining it? Well, what do you mean by what do you mean? He started to explain it. But Rashi felt that there was something very deep, much deeper in these words than he just started to explain it. Rashi says he explained it in 70 languages. Now, did Moses know 70 languages? I'm going to say he did, because how else could he explain it in 70 different languages? We have this notion that back in those days, there were 70 nations, and we refer to the 70 nations quite often. We don't have time for that right now. And each of the 70 nations, of course, had their own language. There were 70 languages, and Moses explained it to the people in 70 languages. There's a commentary called Chidushei Harim. Harim, the rim. So this is officially a rim shot. The Chidushei Harim says the following, that God knew that because the Jews were going to be exiled, the Jews would be everywhere around the globe, and they would learn the language of wherever they are. And therefore they would need to be taught, and that's why they were taught by Moses in 70 languages. They would need to be taught and inspired in their own language, and also with their own language to inspire the nations in their language, with the Torah teachings to be distributed to the nations of the world. Once the Jewish people know all the nations, they can teach the nations in which they are in their own language. They can teach them aspects of the Torah, God's will, spirituality, to the nations of the world. And they could do it in the language of that nation because they know that language. Where did they learn it? Ostensibly from Moses, when he gave the review of the Torah in 70 languages. So, God was very concerned, Moses was very concerned, that there should be no time in history when Jewish people should be disenfranchised from the Torah due to the language. They didn't want to be disadvantaged about the Torah due to the language. So, what's the Derech Eretz lesson? This one rings for me in a very special, specific way. The Derech Eretz lesson number 2 that I gained from this is that we need to cut people slack if they don't know the language of the nation, and to understand how hard it is to learn a new language, especially as an adult. So here I am in Efrat, in Gush Etzion, outside of Jerusalem, the land of Israel. There are a lot of people who came here on Aliyah. There are many people who took an ulpan. They took various courses to get to learn how to speak a colloquial Hebrew, conversational Hebrew, etc. And then there are many, and I have to include myself in a big way, there are many who have not yet mastered the language. And those of us who have not yet mastered the language, We often hear from people who live here, how come you don't know Hebrew yet? So we'll say to somebody, a clerk at a store, Efshar ledaber be'anglit? Is it okay to speak in English? Very often they will say, lo, lo. I remember once going into an office a few years ago, and I said to this person, Efshar ledaber be'anglit? Is it possible for us to speak in English? Because I didn't have enough Hebrew at the time. And the gentleman says to me in a very sympathetic way, but it didn't help. He said to me in Hebrew, but I'll translate to English, Sir, if we lived in America, I would be happy to speak to you in English. But we're here in Israel, and we must speak in Hebrew. Well, that was so helpful. My parents, they should both rest in peace. Born in Hungary, they learned Hungarian. Then they moved here to Israel. For 12 and a half years, they had to learn Hebrew. Then they moved to America, and they had to learn English. Were they all accented? Oh, yes, they were. But they spoke the language. They had to learn the language, and it's not easy. Here in Israel, there are many things like street signs that are translated into Hebrew, English, Arabic. When you make a call to one of the local medical organizations, and they give you a phone tree. For Hebrew, press 1. For English, press 2. For Arabic, press 3. And for Russian, press 4. So they give you 4 different choices very, very often. There happens to be a large Ethiopian population here that speaks Amharic. I have to tell you, I've never heard a phone message that say, if you speak Amharic, press 5 or something like that. Anyway, the bottom line is helping people who don't speak the language is, in my opinion, a huge Derech Eretz, not to make fun of them, not to make them feel uneasy or they don't fit in. It's hard, as an adult, it's hard to enter this coconut with a brand new language. I speak Hungarian. Not a lot, but enough to get by. I speak, thank God, English, Hebrew, a little bit of Yiddish. I never make fun of people who don't speak the language, whatever the language is. I sympathize with them, and I feel sorry that they don't know it yet, but I'm going to help them as much as I can. So I think this is Derech Eretz lesson number 2 about languages, to help people speak the language, and if they don't, to help them as much as possible. By the way, it's very often the case that I'll say to people, Efshar ledaber be'anglit? And they would, or do you speak English? And they would say, a little. And you know what I find out? They don't speak just a little, they speak pretty good. You know, they use like technical terms that, wow, for a little, how did you get that technical term? So very often Israelis may not want to speak English. They may feel embarrassed themselves by speaking English. They don't know it all, whatever. But I think it's a big Derech Eretz lesson to be kind and empathetic and compassionate to people who don't speak the language, and however much we can help here, America, wherever you are, to help people speak the language. May you be blessed. God bless you for a long, long time. Here's our third Derech Eretz lesson for today, and I like this one a lot. It says, chapter 1, verse 10, Hashem Elokeichem, the Lord your God, hirba etchem vehinchem hayom kekochvei hashamayim larov. God has multiplied you, and behold, you are today like the stars of heaven in abundance. This is what Moses is saying to the people. Well, so I have a question, and many commentators also asked, how numerous was the people at that time? In our Jewish history, how numerous have we been? Have we been like the stars in the sky? I'm not an astronomer, so I don't know how many stars there are in the sky, but my guess is we fall short of being the exact number as the stars in the sky. That's the sky that we see. What about the Milky Way and other chocolate bars? What about the galaxy? Who knows how many stars and whatever there is up there? So Rashi was also wondering about this. What do you mean you'll be like the stars in the sky? And Rashi says, no, here's, I think, what God means. He said, you are compared to the sun and the moon and the stars. Maybe not in number, but you will exist forever like them. You will exist forever like them. So you say, well, it's a very nice message, thanks. What's the Derech Eretz lesson? And I would say to you, the Derech Eretz lesson that God is giving us himself is guaranteeing us, as a Jewish people, immortality. Guaranteeing that immortality. In the midst of all the challenges that we live through in our long Jewish history, wherever we think that, like the moon, our crescent is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and oh my gosh, we're ready to disappear, we're going to get wiped out by the nations of the world, by their deeds, by their words, by their anti-Semitism, we're going to get wiped out. Just like the moon comes down to its tiniest crescent, lo and behold, or in this case, very high and behold, it then begins to rebound, and it grows and grows and grows again, and it becomes full. But this is the cycle of Jewish history, and this is what God is saying. According to Rashi, he is giving us the hope and reassurance and total confidence that no matter what, we are an eternal people and we will exist forever. And to me, that's a Derech Eretz of comfort, serenity, tranquility, and boy, that is what we need the most. Not just in these days, which are ripe with all kinds of things against Israel and against the Jewish people, all kinds of uncontested remarks that are anti-Semitic, that doesn't seem to catch the attention of a whole lot of people. That's a little scary. Well, we are eternal. This is what God is saying. And that's a thank you, God, for that Derech Eretz message, that we don't worry. Don't worry. You'll be around all the time. You are eternal, you're mine, and I'm going to protect you and have your back all the time. So next time you're able to go and travel, and you can go to a travel agency or book your tickets online, here are some places you may want to go to, okay? Ask for 2 tickets or however many to the Babylonian Empire. Right. Ask for some brochures. I'd like to travel to the Roman Empire. Do you have any brochures on that? I'd really like to go to the Ottoman Empire, put my feet up for a few days on those Ottomans. That's a good name for a furniture store, isn't it? The Ottoman Empire. Anyway, I'd like to travel to the Seleucid Empire. I would like a few brochures of the Byzantine Empire. They're gone. They're gone, erased. And the Jewish people, ta-da, are still here. Thank God, thank God. So this is God's promise of eternity. This is a huge Derech Eretz message from God, that in the midst of the challenges and hardships, threats and dangers of being a Jew and having the land of Israel and living in the land of Israel, you will be here forever while everybody else may have their demise. I like that. As a Jew and living in Israel, that's a good message. Here's Derech Eretz message number 4. This is now chapter 1, verse 12. Seems to be all the Derech Eretz messages are in the early part of this week's Torah portion, chapter 1, verse 12. It says, Moses is talking, and he says, Eicha esa levadi, torchachem umasachem verivchem. Moses is saying to the Jewish people, how can I carry alone your contentiousness, your burdens, and your quarrels? Were the Jewish people a quarrelsome people? Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Were they stiff-necked? Oh, wow. Oh, yes. Very, very. That was the nature of the Jewish people at the time, and boy, it hasn't changed. In any case, so this is what Moses is telling them. How could I have possibly carried all by myself your contentiousness, your burdens, and your quarrels? What is Moses saying? He's expressing how hard it has been to lead this nation. And it has been hard. And if we've read it until now, and we continue to read it every year, we know they're a tough crowd. They really are. They are like a family vacation or being stuck at home. You have arguments and fights and shouting, insulting, crying, screaming, temper tantrums. And that's just the parents. Let me tell you about the kids. So it's hard for Moshe. He's got to put up with a whole lot each and every day. It wasn't all glory. So interestingly enough, this phrase that we will read this coming Shabbat in the synagogue, this phrase, Eicha esa levadi, how will I carry all of you all by myself? That phrase is read with the same tune, the same trup, as we will read the book of Eicha, which is going to be read Wednesday night, next Wednesday night, God willing, as the opening of the day of commemoration of Tisha B'Av. And the tune of Eicha is sung, very unique melody. It's plaintive, it's sad, it's mournful, it's sorrowful. I'll read it to you. This is how it'll be read, this verse of chapter 1, verse 12. Eicha esa levadi, torchachem umasachem verivchem. That's how it will be read this coming Shabbat in the synagogues. So I think that reading this verse with that very mournful, sad, kind of a tragic melody, I think it's teaching us a Derech Eretz lesson. And here's what I think it is. We want to be empathetic to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, our teacher. We sing it in that mournful, dirgy melody when we talk about the great challenges that he had of dealing with this type of a nation. In my opinion, in order to feel his pain and anguish, working with a holy but a still stiff-necked people. So I think the reason we sing it in that way, with that particular verse, which begins with the word Eicha, and that's the name of the book, Eicha, that we read Wednesday night, I think it's done to commiserate with him about all his travels and his challenges. It's our way of saying, Moshe, we get it. We know what you went through. We know it was tough. We know it was hard. Rashi has this to say. He says, what did Moshe mean that he had a lot of difficulty with these people? Rashi says that when Moshe left early, from his tent, people would observe, and they would say, he must have troubles at home with his family. That's why he's cutting out early. When Moshe would leave late from his tent, the people would say, you know why he's leaving late? He's taking extra time to devise negative plans against us, to make our lives miserable. Imagine that. I'm going to say that most of the people appreciated Moses. But there were these groups the rabble-rousers, nothing like a good rabble, the rabble-rousers who made his life miserable. And so I think the Derech Eretz lesson here is that our tune shows our sympathy and our empathy. We feel for you, Moses. We feel with you. And I think empathy, to show people empathy, is a huge gift of Derech Eretz. That is Derech Eretz lesson number 4. And now in the waning moments of our time today, here's Derech Eretz lesson number 5. It's chapter 1, verse 22. Moses is describing the time that the people wanted spies. Eventually, we'll call them spies. The nation wanted people to go into the land of Canaan, which is eventually the land of Israel, etc. People wanted people to go into the land of Canaan, to spy it out, to go and do some reconnaissance. What is it like, etc. And here's how Moses describes it. Chapter 1, verse 22. Vatikrevun elai kulchem vatomru. All of you came close to me and said, Nishlacha anashim lefanenu. Let us send men before us, pre-us, not driving a Prius. Vayachperu lanu et haaretz. Moshe is saying to the people, you approached me, all of you, and said, let us send people ahead of us to spy out the land. You know, it happened to be not a very good idea, which we don't have time to talk about that now. But when Moshe says the words, you came to me, kulchem, all of you, here's the comment that Rashi makes, a brilliant comment. He says, they came to Moshe, kulchem, all of them. What does that mean? The people ganged up upon him all at once. Says Rashi, in a disorderly manner. He uses the word be'irbuvia. Irbuvia means chaotic. Chaotic. The people came to Moses and approached him in a very chaotic way, pushing and shoving like a rabble. Children are pushing the parents, parents are pushing the children. It's in a panic, says Rashi, that indicated a total lack of faith. Moses said, God will protect you when you go into the land. We don't really need people to do reconnaissance. Trust God, he will take care of you. But the people lacked faith, and they wanted people to go see it and report back, etc. So their request, which is not outlandish, but it's probably not a good idea what they wanted. Their request began, says Rashi and others, with a total lack of derech eretz. Pushing, shoving. It's not like there was a group of people that represented the people and said it a nice way. If you'd kindly listen to our request, we have a request that may be a little bit out of the ordinary, but we hope and pray, Moses and some of the other leaders, that you might be able to understand what we're asking for, and perhaps you'll give permission for this kind of a reconnaissance group. But they didn't do that. They came as a rabble. They came angry. They came discoordinated. And they came like a blob of people, and that's not how you do it. So here's the Derech Eretz lesson, and I think it's a really good one. When people are involved in something virtuous, you want to do something virtuous by yourself, with a group, an organization, something large, they need to have appropriate Derech Eretz from the very beginning. But here, their whole venture began rudely. And that's how it ended. It ended rudely, terribly, and, say the commentaries, because they cried all that night when they heard the terrible report from the spies, say our ancestors and our sages, that night was Tisha B'Av. As if God is saying to them, tonight you cry for no reason. In the future, I will give you plenty of reasons to cry. And cry we do. On Tisha B'Av, 2 temples were destroyed. Other terrible calamities happened on the 9th of Av, and it all started with that. So, to wrap up this 5th lesson, when lacking Derech Eretz for whatever we do, we're trying to get people on board. When lacking Derech Eretz, it shows that all that follows is likely to be not proper. If you'd like to get people on board with something, start it with proper honor and respect. Getting off to a good start is crucial to the success of whatever you want to accomplish. And if you start it in the right way, if you begin the whole process with Derech Eretz, it informs the virtue of the entire project. And if you begin the entire project with a lack of Derech Eretz, it will inform how lacking and how in trouble and unvirtuous that project is going to be. So it all starts at the very beginning. How you behave, what we say, how we present it, how we ask, how we request. All of that has to be done with Derech Eretz. Then there's a good shot that whatever thing we have in mind will actually take place with God's blessings. Dear friends, thank you so much for joining me today. I wish you a wonderful rest of the day or rest of the evening, wherever you are. And I want to wish you good health and happiness. Wish you a Shabbat Shalom this coming Shabbat. Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. We read a Haftorah from the prophet Jeremiah, who, when he wasn't a bullfrog, did some amazing, amazing prophecies. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Tell your friends. We're here on Wednesday nights. Monday nights, we do Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. I wish you all well. Thanks again. And shalom, everybody. Bye-bye.